I'm Terry Mumford, and Kaz Margano and I are going to be working you all through this training this evening, Civics for Change. This is a training that we have prepared on behalf of Building Bridges for America. And there are 3 of us who do these trainings, myself, Kaz, and then Jenny Okamoto, who could not join us this evening, but she is one of our presenters who focuses on grassroots training. Everything that you need about this course, you will be able to find on our website, including the slides will be up there. We'll have a workbook up there, and the session is being recorded and will be posted up there in a couple of days. Building Bridges for America is a volunteer group that evolved out of the Pete Buttigieg campaign, and the mission, vision, and values are here on the screen. These training programs are part of, to my mind, that vision part where we are working toward an informed and engaged electorate. This session on Civics for Change is one of 8 sessions in this training series. We're coming near the end. If you've been with us before, you know that we're every Thursday for these 8 sessions at 8 o'clock Eastern. Then we're going to take a couple weeks break and then come back and do a spring session. Then we'll take a break and come back for a summer session. These training sessions are in 3 categories. This is the Civics for Change, which is one of 2 sessions on civics. And then we have 3 sessions that are really focused on the grassroots organization. And we've done 2 of those. We have 1 of those remaining. And then we have 3 sessions that are really focused on communication. And again, we've done 2 of the 3, so we have just 2 more sessions to go in this set of 8. We're hoping that you'll feel free to use the chat feature and to let us know where you're joining us from. That amazing map there shows where we have had people join us over the course of the couple of years that we've been doing this. So, you know, if you're going to be one of the people who helps us fill in the map, we would love to hear from you. Or if you're one of the people who've coming from where we've had a lot of coverage already, we'd love to hear from you. So introduce yourself in the chat, where you're from. If you're working with a particular campaign organization, let us know. If by chance this is your first Building Bridges session, you know, let us know that too. Because there are so many people on the Zoom, we won't be doing Q&A during the presentation. So go ahead, if you do have a question as we're going along, enter that in the chat and we'll try to follow up later. And because I will save a few minutes for a Q&A at the end. I've gone through this, I've rehearsed it, so I know that there are some minutes there at the end. And also feel free to chat with each other as we're going along. Kaz will be giving you some information in the chat about where you can, you know, follow up on things that are mentioned. But just in general, know that you can go back to the website and hopefully get what you need. The meeting will be about an hour, and we're so appreciative that we have you with us. This is just a reminder that when you do go to the website, you'll be able to download a step-by-step workbook, and this as well as see the slides and see a recording. something I want to point out about the workbook and about the whole presentation, and that is the workbook is really very straightforward, and it can be used by beginners as well as people who are experienced. What we're envisioning with this program is that you all on the call, on the Zoom, are probably the more experienced organizers, the more experienced advocates. And you'll be using your knowledge to help perhaps less experienced people go through the workbook and get the information that they need. On this slide is just a little bit about my history. I am a retired lawyer. I spent all of my working life in and around government, working for government. I was a lobbyist. And so I'm hoping that some of my experiences, hopefully all of my experiences, can be useful to you as we talk about how we can effectively reach out to policymakers. And this topic is a little bit different from the other topics that we cover in our training. Most of our other trainings, we're talking about engaging voters, communicating with voters. This presentation is focused on how we communicate with policymakers. How do we get our point of view to elected leaders, to government administrators? And as I mentioned, the presentation is probably for the more experienced organizer or advocate who's thinking about how can I be more effective in my own communications, and how can I be more effective perhaps in advising a group that I'm with on their communications. This is a presentation for optimists. I'm an optimist. I'm someone who believes that you and I and our friends and family can make politics and government better. But let's just think for a minute about why people don't just reach out to their policymakers. And so go ahead and put some of your ideas in the chat, and then I'll go ahead and just show you what at least some of the research says, and that is that people don't reach out to their policymakers to let them know their opinion because they're unsure about the source of the problem. They don't know who to contact. And Kaz, what else are you seeing in there?
I like Tom led it off by saying it doesn't occur to them to do it. The idea of reaching advocacy is something that, you know, again, we call our original civics class the stuff they no longer teach you in school. So yeah, if the idea of reaching out to your policymakers isn't something you've heard of, yeah, you're not going to think of it. Confusion, not knowing who to reach out to or the best way to contact. So Mia, exactly what we're going to cover here tonight. Being here a Hoosier, this is near and dear to my heart, Melissa, that they are in a red supermajority state. Yes, so Terry and I are both Hoosiers. Alongside, it looks like you're from Muncie, so thank you so much for your work here in Indiana. Laura says that they don't respond, don't know where to go. It's intimidating. Lots of really good responses here that I really connect with.
Right. I really love the one about not kind of like not knowing you could, not knowing. I mean, I'm going to have to add that to the slide next time. So thank you. But something to know about me is that I collect quotes. I mean, all kinds of quotes. And so I had to put a few of them in here. And Alice Walker said that the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. And we probably should modify that with what we're just thinking, by not thinking they don't have any, or just not knowing that there's an option for them. So I'm going to be really thinking about that. And then Glennon Doyle said, the secret is not to allow the fact that you can't do everything keep you from doing something. She says, something, then rest, something, then rest. And that also is going to be a theme that we want to talk about in here. And then, of course, you know, the very, very meaningful is you can't win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket. And by that, I mean a politician is not going to know, has no chance of knowing what you think if you don't tell them. So we're going to win the lottery. We're going to buy the ticket by doing that communication. And so the work tonight is we're going to talk about understanding the basics. Then we're going to work through the workbook and talk about how, if you're with a group of friends, or perhaps your local Democrat club, you know, how do you pick the issues that you want to focus on? Because that to me is a real crucial part of this, is that we need to give ourselves permission not to do everything. We need to give ourselves permission to, in order to be effective, to focus and pick the issues that we will spend our time on. And then we will talk about how you would address a specific issue, and we'll have an example of that, of how to do that with a specific issue. And the other work tonight is what we've called like turning polls into action. I don't know if you've been looking at social media today, but I have been assured by at least by the social media bubble that I'm in, that I think, you know, 90% of Americans agree with me on gun safety, or 80% of America agrees with me on reproductive rights. So, you know, everything ought to be just absolutely perfect. But, you know, the question that is out there is, if a particular policy is widely and wildly popular or unpopular, why don't elected officials, you know, follow that? And the answer is because their constituents have not effectively expressed their opposition or their support. And the way, as constituents, we express that opposition or support is through our vote. You know, we'll get a chance to do that in November, or sooner than that in our primaries. But what we're going to be talking tonight is, how do we, through our direct contact, make sure a policymaker knows what we think. When I was working in the Indiana State Legislature, there were so many times when one of the legislators would say, well, you know, I saw on TV that everybody supports this particular idea, but none of my constituents have told me that. And in some ways that can be pretty frustrating, but on the other hand, that's how our democracy is supposed to work, is that legislator is supposed to be hearing and responding to the direct contacts from his constituents. So we're going to talk about that kind of contact. And the other thing is, even though I'm going to give you some examples that are focused on federal legislation, just because I thought that was easier since we have people from around the country, this type of direct contact that we're talking about is particularly effective at the local level and the state level, because of just how numbers work. You could be one of 10,000 or one of 10 million, and being one of 10,000, your voice, it's easier for your voice to be heard. And on this call, there are about 100 people on the call, and some of you are super volunteers. You are the campaign resource. You are the leader of a group of volunteers. You're an advisor to the candidate. And when we're talking about these type of communications, you are going to be the person who really helps set the tone of the communications. You're going to be coming up with the plan of who should be sending the letters, where they should be going, so that as a super volunteer, you are going to be that experienced person who is advising and leading others. Most of us on the call are, quote, just a volunteer. And you're doing the phone banking and the canvassing and postcard writing and yard sign distributing and lit dropping and all those things. And you want to be really good also at your communications, because you will be asked to make those communications, to write those letters, write the postcards. All of us on this Zoom are also trusted voices. Our friends, our family, our colleagues, they trust us to give them good advice because we understand civics. So we have a responsibility to be really well informed and be able to give that just off the cuff advice to our friends, families, and colleagues. And then we're all concerned citizens who want to be good communicators with our policymakers. And so we're gonna talk about that tonight. Just to let you know, if you want to have a discussion of the basics of our Constitution and federal and state legislation, and also elections, we have materials on the website called Civics 101, and that will have, again, a workbook. It'll have slides. It'll have a recording of the presentation, and you can refer that for yourself. You can refer to that for yourself, or you can use that as training for others. Whoops, sorry. So now we're going to talk about the workbook. And as I said at the beginning, the workbook is simplicity itself. It is fill in the blank. But it takes someone with your experience to help people work through those blanks in order to have a really valuable document. And if you are the super volunteer, you are going to want to work through that workbook for yourself so that you have a complete resource that you can use in advising the campaign, advising the organization, advising other volunteers. In the workbook, the first thing that as the leader, the first concept you're going to work yourself through is this idea of jurisdiction. Now, see, as a lawyer, I thought everyone knew what jurisdiction was. Well, that's not true. And so what we do when we're talking about jurisdiction is that we're talking about something as a lot of times about just geography. And the workbook starts you out like, kind of like a running start, like what state are you in? Done. And then county, city, school district, and then are there some special service districts that you need to be worried about? Now, if you're talking with you as the super volunteer, if you're leading a group of volunteers through this exercise, you want to give them some good momentum at the start, and then you need to talk with them about why it's important to know these geographical jurisdictional ideas, because they translate in the political world into legal jurisdiction, legal responsibility. We know that the governor of a state is responsible for the whole state, but who is responsible in a county? And this, so right away, if you're working with your group and if county issues are important, you're going to have them help you fill out that chart, or you will have already filled out the chart and you'll be helping walk them through it. And then you're going to move on and talk about the people who are responsible within those jurisdictions for those legal, for the legal issues. And this is, so you would fill this in, and again, you can get a good running start because we know that every state is going to have, there are 2 US senators, and then every state is going to have a number of US representatives, a minimum of 1. And right away, if you're talking to a sort of a beginning group, you'll have to help them figure out how they will figure out who is their US representative, because again, we want to be effective. And so we don't want to, waste our time and effort communicating with someone who is not our representative. So we need to know who that is. And then we can go through at the state level, same kind of breakdown. Everybody should hopefully know who their governor is, but who is their state senator? Who is their state representative? And the policymaker chart helps you work through that. You may want to make that that chart bigger, because you may want to add at the state level, Secretary of State, so crucial for elections, the treasurer, the attorney general, CFO. At the local level, you might want to add judges, township trustees, the advisory board. So hopefully, again, if you're leading a group or just for yourself, if you want to go beyond that list of jurisdictions and that list of policymakers, do it. What we're doing here is we want to be sure that before your organization begins, that you are operating from a position of knowledge, that you have the correct information. You want to be credible, you want to be effective. And so you'll be asking yourself, if I'm concerned about wetlands, should I be focused on legislation? Should I be focused on the administration of legislation? Who are the agencies that I need to be concerned with? And how do I help my family and friends and colleagues figure out who they need to communicate with? And if I'm just also trying to help my family, and they're saying, well, I saw an ad for Terry Mumford, and she's running for state representative. How do I help my family make sure that if I'm running for state representative, am I running to be their state representative, or am I really irrelevant to them in that respect? The next thing that the workbook will ask you to do is to identify what are the issues or campaigns that are motivating you to take action. Now, if you already have that issue identified, great. But if you are with perhaps, again, a Democrat club or a progressive group that is trying to figure out where do they want to spend their time and effort, then you might use this worksheet to help you. One of the things that this worksheet hopefully will give you, that permission is to say, I think you might be in a group that says, well, just everything needs to change. Well, that might be true. But what are the 1, 2, or 3 issues that we want to focus on? And do we want to focus on something that has an immediate and practical impact on your family? Do you want to have something that has an impact more on the community? But it's right after the 2016 election, there was an article that was in Psychology Today that was widely circulated that was on this point. And the person who wrote that article said, basically, you're going to drive yourselves crazy if you try to fix everything that you think is now wrong after the 2016 election. Pick one issue, pick 2 issues, and focus on those, and you will become more knowledgeable and more effective. So this issue identification worksheet is designed to help do that. And the other thing this issue identification worksheet does is it immediately gets you thinking about 2 things. One is, are there organizations already working on these issues? The answer is probably yes, but find that organization, see if they are in fact the organization that has the same views you do, and then they can have done, that organization or organizations could have done a lot of the research that you might be interested in. They can also be helping you in terms of its legislation. They can be letting you know, is the legislation moving right now? Where is it in the process? So that's something for you to do I think, again, right at the beginning. And then also right at the beginning is get yourself started by talking about and thinking about your issue in consistent and positive ways. It's about training your brain so that when someone says, well, what are you working on? You say, I'm working on safe streets. I'm working on good health care. And so you were from the beginning, you are ready to talk about your issues in the ways that are positive and also consistent. Consistent is just a really good way of saying repetitive, and being repetitious in this political world of communication is crucial. So let's tie it all together. Excuse me. The workbook asks you to fill out this worksheet when it comes to the issues that you have now identified, that you've picked your one, two, or three issues, and now you're going to, have this discipline of saying, who is in charge of this issue? Is it, do I need to write the governor? Do I need to write the mayor? Who do I need to write? Because I can assure you this, that the easiest way to be cast aside, or have your views be cast aside, is to send your information, to call your information, to talk to, in essence, the wrong person, because they can say, that person, that person, they were so nice, they were so communicative, but I got nothing to do with their issue. You're toast. So spend that time, figure out who's the person you need to talk to, and then how do you want to identify, frame, and formulate your issue? Again, it's safe roads. And then what's my message, and where do I deliver my message? So we're going to work through those parts of that worksheet. And so the who's in charge, we already have that governmental worksheet, governmental cheat sheet. We're going to go back and use it. And if we're working with a group, we're going to make sure that your group knows how to figure out who should be contacted. And we're going to reach out to those who are for and against us. And those of us in the red states, sometimes you just go, I know they're not listening, but they might be. And the other thing I would say is it's in a red state, when my wonderful state representative and state senators, who are each of whom is a Democrat, they are always fighting the good fight. And so I try to send them messages every so often, just thanking them for what they're doing. So when you're going to who's in charge, don't just knock someone off because you know they disagree with you, and don't just knock someone off because you know they agree with you. Once your message is perfected, it doesn't take you that much longer to send it to all the people who are in charge. If you are that super volunteer at the organizational level, you'll be developing, the summary of issues. You'll be talking, what's your purpose? What are your goals? And you'll compile the information that might be needed. And you'll be working, as we said, with other organizations to share resources. And then as a super volunteer, a trusted voice, you'll be assisting in developing communications. That will connect, and you're going to be working on developing uniform and consistent explanations, and you're going to be giving these tips to the individuals who are going to be writing the letters, making the phone calls, going to meetings, and here's what each person needs to do. Each person needs to explain why they are concerned about this issue. They need to identify the issue in these very positive terms. They need to frame the issue around their values. what am I'm concerned about good roads because I'm a hard worker. I need to get to work. Or I'm concerned about fair health care because I want to make sure that my children and grandchildren are, feel good, are healthy. So we want to have figured out why we're concerned. And it's that personal story that we want to encourage us as individuals and our, members of our group to come up with a specific example. Why does it matter to them? Is it one of their children? Is it their sibling? Is it their spouse? Is it they themselves? Why are they concerned? And then ask for specific action. Again, you would be amazed if you could see some of the beautiful letters. When I was in when I worked for our governor in Indiana, we had a big room in the where people, generally young people, read the messages that came in, letters, emails from constituents who were concerned and wanted the governor to know their concern. And so many, and they would put them into piles, yes, no, and we don't know. And what was so amazing, and truly amazing, was how big the pile was that was where the person who wrote in didn't say what they wanted the governor to do. Now, maybe that goes back to the first point, is that they didn't, that when we were getting them, y'all's input, maybe they didn't know what to ask the governor to do. But if you're the super volunteer or the volunteer, help your members make that specific ask. What do they want the governor to do? And it's actually very, very helpful. And then once we've done all this wonderful work, all this preparatory work of figuring out, where the problem is, who you should write to, what you should say. Now you have to get all that, you've written down what you got to say, you've rehearsed it. Now what are you going to do? Well, if you're the super volunteer, the candidate, the leader of your organization is going to be they're going to share brief policy statements with policymakers. They're going to start talking with the policymakers. They're going to be, at town halls. And then you're going to be helping members deliver their communications by emails, letter, phone calls, personal meetings. So again, you'll be helping the people in your group decide how are they going to communicate. And just as a side note, it is important, to the extent people feel safe doing it, for when you're writing a letter, when you're doing the email, to include some basic contact information so that the person receiving the communication knows that the person writing is a constituent, because in our democracy, that's how it should work. We want to say that we are constituents. And then consider all the options for communicating, make phone calls, be prepared to speak live or leave a voicemail. But before you call, write down and rehearse what you will say. I'm someone who has a stutter, and if I don't rehearse, then I could get really thrown off. And I think a lot of people are also plagued with some anxiety if they're talking to someone who they think is important. But if you've rehearsed, you can put that anxiety to use for you, and you'll just be more effective. Send the email, letter, or postcard. I personally communicate with my U.S. senators and my adored representative using the forms on their websites. And just as a note, if you wanted to have snail mail delivered to DC office, postcards are better, and you can send mail to the district office. I'm someone who thinks that We probably should avoid a form letter or a postcard if we're really trying to use persuasion or personalize them. I recently experimented with using one of the online, fill this in here and we'll send a letter to your senator. And I did that. And I did get an acknowledgement back from the senator, but it wasn't about the issue I had written it on. It was darn close, but it wasn't it. So, I mean, there's no reason, I suppose, when I say avoid, I probably don't mean avoid. I guess I should mean don't rely on form letters. If you see something that's a form letter and you personalize it, well, then go ahead and maybe do something in addition to that. Write an op-ed. We're going to talk about that a little at the end. And then speak in person. If there's a public meeting or a town hall, it is just really great if you have the opportunity to speak in person and deliver the message that you want to deliver, that you've worked on so hard. And so in the workbook, there's just an example of how you would go through this the example that's in the workbooks on federal voting rights, but it clearly wouldn't be limited to that. When we're talking about using civics for change, we want to be present, we want to be positive, and we want to be repetitive. As I've said, I know more than once at this point, that policymakers must hear from their constituents. We do not want to allow policymakers to only hear one point of view. So that's our job. Next is that the facts do not speak for themselves. I know that we are being constantly told that what we need to do is explain to people these very big numbers of what the president has done, and we actually probably should be doing that. But those facts of 10 million of this or 100 million of that, the science will tell you that those facts don't speak for themselves. What speaks for themselves is us. Us talking about our own experience is what is persuasive. And so we need to explain our why. And we do not need, or should we, spend our time demonizing our opponents. And just also be considering is that beyond the direct contacts that we make, how can we influence policymakers? And we're going to talk in the middle there. I mentioned op-eds, but we're going to talk about that at the end. But reach out to reporters. You would, if you have any reporter, if you're a reporter, or if you have any reporters in your family, then you know that reporters are pretty much, I mean, they have to interview the policymakers, I guess, but boy, did they love to interview the person in the street, and you can be the person in the street. And if you're in your local paper, if there's an issue that you're interested in, and there's a reporter who's been writing about that issue, very often that reporter has his or her name or email, phone or email at the end of the story. Contact them. Say, I have a personal reason to be in support of this or to be in opposition to this. And you could be that. That is in many cases, a very appealing story. And then you could, of course, organize a Facebook group around these issues. But what we're trying to do is provide that sustained flow of information, because once is never enough. I do not, I know that any number of you all are really great communicators and have excellent ways of presenting an issue, but we have to be focused on that, on repetition. We have to be figuring out what are the many ways that we can reach out, and how can we reach out repetitively on our issue. So let's do this. Let's talk about a particular way of communicating and how do these rules apply. And so this are some of the rules that I think apply to every communication, whether you're writing it or speaking it. Is it start with your name, give whatever is the location information. Generally, it's your zip code is crucial. I want to say that I'm their constituent, and then I want to perhaps connect with them. Maybe I've supported them, or I've mention any point of contact. And then what do I want them to do? And what are the 3 things that I want to say? And again, there's people who study communications have not told me directly, as an individual. It told me in a group that that's all you're going to get is 3 things to get to someone's get ahead. And then think back to that when they were teaching you in grade school about writing a paragraph. Always use the topic sentence. Always tell where you want them to go, and then have your description. Do not do it the other way. And then talk about why whatever this is affects you personally. Here's your story. Then summarize, restate. If someone is supporting you, please express your appreciation, and then thank you. And here's some things not to say. If you say, I will never vote for you, well, then there is actually no reason for that person to read your letter. I wouldn't read the letter. And then, insults. I just did these because I thought they were, I had actually, when I put this slide together, I had seen some of these things in social media, and I thought, well, that's not very helpful. But on a serious note, again, in our communications, I'd like for you to consider these 3 points. When you are arguing against the other side, do not use their language. This is so hard, but this is George Lakoff, who really knows this stuff. If you've read his books, he knows. And so what I would say is this is one of the reasons that you practice. This is one of the reasons why you workshop something, you sit in a group, because it is when you're really, really upset about something, when you're really, I don't like what the opposition is saying, you want to dive right in and start talking about what they're saying, and don't do that. You have to figure out a way to talk about what you want to talk about without using the language that you are opposing. And then another difficult thing that George Lakoff asks us to do, he says, when you repeat a lie, even to debunk it, you help strengthen it and make it stronger. And so he says, remember this, when someone provokes you with an absurd lie, are you falling into a trap? And again, the same thing is that if do not start off with the problem, start off with your solution. And Barack Obama says, don't start with a slogan. Let's start with what is true. So as you're crafting your communication, make sure you are starting with what is true and what you believe in, what you want to say in a positive note. And we'll get back to, I just want to get back to that point of what we're talking about doing in these effective communications is not just, what's, at the top, what's at the headline, but not just what's at the federal or state level. We're also talking about, it's something that's a state only issue. And if you're in Indiana, you are really, I'm probably concerned about protection of LGBTQ plus people and trans kids, and you're very concerned about wetlands. Or you might be at the local level concerned about police reform, education policy, but it is super important for you all to, as I'm sure you are, to be picking the issues that you want to be involved in, and then helping others pick their issues. So I want us to talk about how we would create a strategy, and I've picked reproductive rights, but again, that doesn't mean we need to be always at a federal level or at a state level. We could be at a local level. But if I want to create a strategy around reproductive rights, going through our worksheet, I would first figure out who should I contact. And it's not that many people. If it's federal legislation, it's 3 people. If it's state legislation, it's probably another 3 people. So you would refer to your cheat sheet, and if you're working with a group, you would reinforce with others so that they get their contacts right, so that they're writing to their representative in Congress, or they're writing to their state representative. And then, what should I say? Is we're gonna follow those rules. We're gonna name ourselves, say we're a constituent. We're gonna give our 3 points, our personal story, our request for action, and then we're gonna have a plan for where I should to deliver my request. So, and what's about some questions? Well, what about social media? One of the things I would say is that we spend a lot of time on our message, how we're going to, who we're going to write to, how we're going to say it. If we want to use that same information on social media, great. And you can do it as simply as, here's a letter I just sent to my state rep. And you can attach it, you can excerpt it, or you can say, here are the 3 points I just made in writing my state rep. So let the work you do serve a number of purposes. And again, I would say, modify form letters. Petitions are generally not enough. And then communicate with those who support you and those who don't. And just follow the same approach, whether you have a written or a verbal communication. So my sample letter on this issue of reproductive rights is, I wrote to my 2 senators and my congressman, Andre Carson, and I found them on their website. So that's how I was able to figure out, where I wanted to send the information. And in my communication with them, again, I identified myself. I described myself. I'm a lifelong Hoosier. You have to give an address. So that's in there. I'm a wife, a mother, a grandmother. I'm 75 years old. And my 3 points are, and they'll be in there in the slides, is that I'm concerned that we've gone for 50 years with abortion right protection. Women and their doctors have known what the rules are, and now, because of Dobbs, we don't know those rules, and I want to preserve those protections. My second point is that these are very complicated issues, and we had developed some protections, and I am particularly worried about these women in these particular circumstances. And then my third point is that civil rights must be protected because the Dobbs decision calls into question other important civil rights like contraception, marriage equality, educational equality. And my action is to preserve those protections, preserve those civil rights. And I got some of this information from, I looked up some resources, again, found those organizations that might agree with me. And I saw, well, these are some ideas that I agree with. And they even have, the ACLU even has a communications guide for Indiana. And so I thought that was really good. And then gun safety is another issue that I'm concerned about. So there are organizations that I follow that have some, where I get information on gun safety. And then just for more information, if you want to know what's going on in the Supreme Court, you can go to the SCOTUS blog. Let's talk about writing an op-ed or letter to the editor, because it's something that is, I think, or can be overlooked. But this is an area where actually we as individuals or as individual organizations are have a really good opportunity. Again, if any of you all are in the newspaper business, You probably have seen the studies which say that readers are much more likely to read an op-ed or a spotlight editorial or letter to the editor than they are to read the actual editor's position. So this is really an opportunity for us to use local media to get your message out. And it's really effective in your smaller media markets, I believe. Policymakers and their staff do pay attention. So if you're hoping that your U.S. representative or senator or your state senator or your mayor, reads your op-ed, your letter to the editor, be sure you put their name in there. So the steps are pretty straightforward. First, you pick your paper. It might be an online paper. It might be, a traditional paper. You determine what is the paper's policy on op-eds or letters to the editor. How do you submit it? What is the length limit? If there is not a length limit, you still have a length limit. Do not go over 300 words. Describe your issue and your views. We're back to that rule of 3. You're going to say 3 things. You're going to say them 3 times. And included in that, you're going to identify yourself, your personal story, why what you're writing about is important to you, and why is it important to the community. You're going to request action. What do you want to happen? Do you want your state representative to take a particular action? Do you want the governor to take a particular action? Are you inviting others to join your organization or invite them to an upcoming event? And then you want to amplify. If your letter to the editor is published, amplify your message by posting in social media. And then you can also, if you want, you can send your letter to the editor to your policymakers or vice versa. You can say, you can post as your letter to the editor a letter you just sent to your state representative. So as we're wrapping up, spend time on issue identification. Why is it important to you and why? What is important to you and why? And spend time determining who's in charge. In preparing your message, stay positive. State what you are for and why. And then be creative in where you distribute that message. Because we're always happy to hear from Amanda Gorman, because there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it, which we are. We are both of those things. We are brave enough to see it and brave enough to be it.